East Coast energy versus West Coast energy. Which is better and why? This is Energy Matters.
So I love this one. This feels to me like the battle of the rappers, the Compton, LA versus New York scene. And of course, I'm going to do my best to rep the West Coast, and Claire is going to rep the East Coast. But both are interesting, and they learn from each other, although maybe slowly. But the differences to me are really interesting and stark and drawn from the degree to which not just energy, but also environment and climate policy have shaped things. So certainly the California perspective on this is that we love our climate. We don't always treat it well, but we talk about it all the time. And we think it's got better weather. It doesn't have the bugs and humidity, et cetera, et cetera. And all of those things, plus how beautiful the West Coast is, has led into a series of really interesting innovations. And if I were to do the total thumbnail version, California started off with a bill that's got a really interesting history. It's called the Pavley Bill, named after Fran Pavley, the creator. Its technical name is Assembly Bill, the lower house, Assembly Bill 32. And it said California had to level out its greenhouse gas emissions by a certain date. People said, can't do it, too aggressive. California essentially was able to do it. That Assembly Bill 32 then evolved into a target for the year 2020 called Senate Bill 32, when Fran Pavley moved from the lower house, the Assembly, to the Senate. And now California has a series of policies that would take many episodes, but in short, California had a mandate for 1 million solar rooftops by a certain year. People said it wasn't possible. California achieved it. Then it had a plan for 1 million and then 1.5 million electric vehicles. People said that wasn't possible. California then achieved it. And California has a cap and trade, a market mechanism where there's a price on emissions, and that cap and trade market raises about $11 or $12 billion a year right now, and 35% of that money, as a floor, not a ceiling, must be spent on low-income, marginalized, fence-line people. So environmental justice is baked centrally into this complicated mixture that I've only just scratched the surface of.
Yeah. So on the flip side, on the East Coast, East Coast states are part of independent grid operators that enable multi-state planning and forecasting and reliability management, whether it's PJM, which stands for Pennsylvania, Jersey, Maryland, but actually constitutes, I think, 11 states now, or ISO New England, which is the New England state, or the New York ISO. By default, these smaller states that are not as big as California are having to forecast and plan together. And in fact, as another example, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, or RGGI, is something that also exists to try to manage carbon emissions.
Yeah, and I think that that is one of the features that, whether you're an East Coast rapper or a West Coast rapper, the fact that California is now the world's fourth largest economy and really drives what's going on in many of the neighboring states, even if they don't want to hear it, does mean that policies and things can be differently done. California has its own investment mechanisms in research and development. California has essentially its own foreign policy with regards to China. There are a number of big ticket differences. But if I were to back up and combine what we did in the last episode on energy efficiency with this one really interesting feature is that if you go back to the plans for California's development as an economy going back to the 60s, the plan was for the so-called hard path, meaning California would need to build a new big power plant. And at one point, there was a plan for a nuclear plant, and we'll talk about nuclear later, of some other big power plant every 20 miles along the 600-mile coastline. That path looked like a huge amount of building, high cost for nuclear, potentially high risk, depending who you are. And that plan was replaced largely due to the work of Art Rosenfeld, one of Enrico Fermi's last PhD students, a towering figure, even though he was a very short man, in the area of efficiency, and many other colleagues. And that effort led to investment in energy efficiency. in the country's first efforts to deploy significant amounts of wind and solar. And that effort is essentially the path that California's been on, with lots of tricky bumps and bruises along the way. But that path has been one that's now really considered the soft path, where distributed resources at scale, in particular renewables, dominate. And so today, California has been able to export renewable energy for over 100 days straight. Not 24 hours a day, but during each day at some point they were selling or trading clean energy to its neighbors.
Right. So back to the East Coast side, we are transmission constrained on the East Coast. And I would suggest that our listeners take a look at the Connecticut Green Bank. And Brian Garcia has been a dear friend for a long time and a wonderful human being. He's has a point where there's not enough transmission. There's not any idea that we're going to be able to do offshore wind anymore. No chance of nuclear.
We'll come back to that.
Yeah, well, right. No chance of nuclear, no chance of coal. And so what are you going to do, right? So, I mean, there are definitely ways that a lot of these states are trying to create mandates and create both carrots and sticks. So, for example, Massachusetts and New York want to be net zero by 2050. New Jersey wants 100% clean energy by 2050. And for a lot of these East Coast states, there's got to be a focus on sea level rise and flooding and storm surges and investment in coastal resilience. Priorities about grid modernization. I mean, some of our grid is over 100 years old. Back to offshore wind, I mean, I think that's been, fraught with all sorts of issues. I was studying Cape Wind, which is an offshore wind project off of Nantucket, in 2002 in my project finance class. And, it still hasn't come totally to fruition.
Yeah, so these are interesting cases. And just to kind of lay the scene for people who don't live and breathe this all the time, Denmark and the United Kingdom and China and South Korea have all done major investments in offshore wind. There's gigawatts of wind available, and the total offshore wind installed in the U.S. today is? Zero. And so there were plans before the current administration for the first significant wind farm to be off the Virginia coast. We are so many decades behind the international players who are finding offshore wind that used to be expensive, now not expensive. You can build bigger machines, bigger arrays, and you can do so in a way where the transmission cables to go into big cities is much easier to do. And yet, for all the reasons you mentioned, we are not there.
Well, Maryland's another good example. The idea was to do 1,500 megawatts off of Ocean City, Maryland, and that would have created somewhere on the order of 15,000 permanent jobs. Was something that everyone was very excited about. But these are huge projects, and they suffer, licensing problems, legislative setbacks, and the utilities have all terminated their power purchase agreements. Things have become more expensive. It's super complicated. But it really doesn't need to be, because as you've said, off of the coast of England, off the coast of lots of European countries, there's offshore wind everywhere.
So let's pull this back to some of the nitty-gritty of this East Coast, West Coast feature. So I want to highlight one particular bank. It was an early player. It was called the New Resources Bank in California. And their model harkens back to what we've talked about previously in the series, energy efficiency. And what they said is that we will underwrite mortgages, and we will give you a better mortgage rate if you take the high efficiency path, if the home has the more efficient washer, dryer, refrigerator, et cetera. And now there's even more benefits if you go and do a home that has no gas. So it's an all-electric house with the induction stove and everything else. I am a new Maryland homeowner, and due to the thankful thoughtfulness of the person I bought the home from, it's all electric. So I don't need to worry about gas bills.
That's very unusual.
I was delighted to find one that has that. But what it also means is that when I install solar, I can meet all my energy needs in a way that's very Californian. And I can think about, when is the market going to change so that I can not just bank my power with utility, but I can actually sell power into the market. And California has talked a great game about building this dynamic kind of eBay-like energy market, but
Still
only
hasn't happened.
very, very, very small pilot steps in this direction.
Well, and even one of the things we talked about in one of our last episodes, NEM 3.0, which is trying to support the expansion of storage, right? But if you're selling electricity back to the grid with your solar plus storage, you're only getting somewhere on the order of 3 to 5 cents a kilowatt hour by selling it back to the grid.
So this is a funny point because as the economist, the business financial person, you, Claire.
Definitely not an economist.
That doesn't sound like a good deal. But
Right.
from my perspective on the climate energy side, I actually think, yes, I would like to see a higher rate of return to ratepayers. But because this is such a gravitational shift in how utilities and their consumers would interact, I'm actually would be very happy with even small, minimal returns to the customer if we could set up a policy regime where those would ramp up over time and build towards a true interactive market where everyone is, as I said in a previous episode, a prosumer. Everyone is a producer and a consumer, and it's a function of when you need power, what the timing is, et cetera. But that world that doesn't make a lot of sense to current regulators is actually one that technology could easily let us move into. We're just not ready for that emotionally or mentally or bureaucratically today.
Well, that also means utilities make less money.
So I'm gonna pull the California card again because that's our episode title. And so in California, transmission has become a big deal for different reasons than the East Coast. It's because we now have a fifth season of the year, thanks to human activity, called fire season: winter, summer, spring, fall, and fire season. And so the utilities have huge liability around those transmission projects. So one of the opportunities that is initially a West Coast thing, I think it's going to spread to the East for reasons you've described, is more and more communities could be, if not 100% energy self-sufficient, largely so. So installing and encouraging rooftop solar and putting big batteries in the basement of municipal buildings and a variety of things so that communities aren't energy islands, but they need less transmission back and forth.
Right.
Can lower costs overall. And this is a combination of the transition from dirty energy to clean energy and really maximizing the use of energy efficiency in all levels.
Well, why is that just a California thing?
Well, I don't think it is, but it certainly started in California.
Oh, for sure.
And I think it's
you
something
started
that will
everything in California. Good for you.
Well, last time I heard, the white settlers in California all came from the East, but we'll get back to that. But certainly on the energy front. And so one topic, and we've only briefly mentioned transportation. So an example of the kind of good dynamic on this is that California 3 years ago was the first U.S. state to say, we are going to end the sale of new gas-powered vehicles.
Yep.
And that year is 2035. That does not say anything about the used vehicle market, nor does it say anything about farm vehicles. So there are nice, important carve-outs for places where those weren't available yet. But California said 2035, no more gas-powered vehicles can be sold in-state. Then I was super pleased to see the Netherlands and UK and Massachusetts all not only adopt that, but they went to 2030.
Yep.
And so they've beat California. And so in this rapper duel between Snoop Dogg and Biggie Big, we're losing, and California needs to up its game because certainly electric vehicles with clean energy save everyone money. And so there's an example of where we need to now relearn from the East Coast.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that one.
It was painful to say, but I had to do it.
I understand. So. I want to make another suggestion in terms of things to talk about is including inclusive prosperity capital based in Connecticut, connected with the Connecticut Green Bank. They're trying to power a brighter tomorrow by delivering clean energy for all through innovative financing solutions. And so there are green banks out there that are focused on trying to support low income, medium income, everybody, and providing financing solutions. So there's been lots of really interesting things that have popped up on the East Coast and the West Coast to try to support energy justice and energy efficiency.
So say a little bit more about this, because we not only have some private banks, I mentioned New Brunswick Bank, you mentioned that one, but the state of Connecticut wanted to do its own state-level bank. So talk about how those things
Well, it does
go
have
through
its
the
own
system.
state. Well, you have a state bank. California has a state bank,
But
Green Bank.
these private ones have actually been
Right.
the leaders in this area.
Right, exactly. Though I think everything's been turned on its head right now that the Trump administration has removed funding for everyone.
Yeah, and we talked about that in the Big Beautiful Bill episode, but it is an issue where lots of developers that thought the landscape was fairly clear in favoring clean energy and energy efficiency are now unsure what's going to happen.
Or the grant funding's been pulled from them, right? Things that were promised to them have now been pulled.
Right. So I'll do another give back to the East Coast. This is going to pain me to say, but among the ideas that were certainly launched in California but did not come to fruition under Governor Schwarzenegger, there was a big effort to build a so-called hydrogen highway. And the idea was we were going to connect various big cities, San Francisco and Los Angeles, San Francisco and the ski areas of Lake Tahoe, with corridors where you could drive your fuel cell vehicle. And we were going to make hydrogen, and the language is going to get slightly complicated here because hydrogen today is not hard to find in the U.S. for industrial uses, but it's what we call gray hydrogen, meaning it's natural gas molecule, a carbon bonded to four hydrogens, CH4, and we're going to split that and get the hydrogen and then do something, we don't know what, with the carbon. So that's gray hydrogen.
Okay.
But what California said is we aren't going to permit that hydrogen in the long run. We are going to only utilize green hydrogen where the hydrogen is made using renewable energy.
Yep.
And that will be a commodity that will go into your fuel cell vehicles. Now, experts will talk differently, but how many of us have actually seen a fuel cell vehicle driving down a road?
I've never seen one.
Well, we have them in California, but they're not common. And the number of hydrogen fueling stations where I used to live in Oakland, California, in the Bay Area, is actually two. There's one for the municipal bus fleet, and there's one that we operated at the University of California as a research hub.
Oh,
There's a
interesting.
couple more as you go up towards Davis and Sacramento, but very few, whereas how many of us have seen or hopefully lease or own an electric vehicle? Many
more. Though I don't know the statistic California versus the East Coast. I mean, anytime I go to California, every third car or second car is an electric vehicle, not on the East Coast.
Right. Well, so in California now, the best-selling car in the state is an electric vehicle, and a third of all vehicle sales are now electric. I'm leaving out the truck market, which is different although there is some penetration now into that one with the new truck companies, things like Rivian and the Ford Lightning. There's a whole bunch of others. But the California policy landscape of encouraging electric vehicles is something that has come up as a alternative because 10, 15 years ago, there was a strong bet on this hydrogen highway, this kind of green corridor, and that just simply didn't pan out relative to the cost declines and the policies that were so much easier to put together to support electric vehicles.
Right.
And so as of 2024, something like 50% of all EVs in the U.S. are still in California.
That's really interesting.
It's a huge number.
And now with a big, beautiful bill terminating the federal tax credit for new and used electric vehicles, that will be terminated by September 30th of 2025. So depending on when you're listening to this, go buy your EV right now or it's too late.
And as a new resident of the East Coast, it really pained me. I actually saw a construction or a maintenance truck taking out an EV charger in Washington, D.C. And that we know that's something that the current administration favors for some strange reason. Maybe it has to do with the Trump-Musk breakup. But it was painful as a Californian to see an EV station being removed on the East Coast.
Well, yes, that does happen. Though I have lots to say about electric vehicles. It isn't just necessarily East Coast versus West Coast. I will give you one thing on California, which is trying to solve one of the many problems associated with electric vehicles, which is Charger Help, started by Camille Terry on the West Coast. Fantastic entrepreneur, female entrepreneur, kicking butt with her startup. electric vehicles, it's a lot of that really has to do with the maintenance of them. And at any given time, 25% of chargers are not functioning. Camille Terry is finding ways to reduce the opportunity for an electric vehicle charger to not be working. So she's providing operations and maintenance services to EVs.
So this is a really important point because it touches on not only an East Coast, West Coast difference, but also a critical role of the environmental and racial injustice.
Yeah.
And so if you're a homeowner and there's a sale on electric vehicles or a rebate, there used to be a $7,500 federal rebate when you buy an EV, that's great if you own a home and a garage where you can pull your EV in and charge it. But with the lack of public charging available in many cities, particularly on the East Coast, the opportunity to take advantage of the benefits of an EV for a low-income person are simply not there. So in California, and just like I guess I should have said before, in many cases, with the cost parity between an electric vehicle and gas vehicles quickly approaching or even being eclipsed, the fact that an EV is in many cases, 1/3 the cost to drive per mile as a gas-powered vehicle when you take into cost the price of fuel and the much lower maintenance. How do you make that available to low-income people? So one thing that we're seeing is charging stations being put in low-income housing areas, and also making sure that the charging stations that are at places of work are not dominated by the affluent. So finding ways to say these are charging stations available for employees. A number of companies have gotten credit for putting in stations that the VPs and executives don't hog because they bought fancy $100,000 EVs, but making these available to people. Those programs need a huge boost up, and right now we're moving in the exact opposite direction.
Though you did make a good point. I mean, we bought a Prius Prime, and that cost $19,000. So it's an electric vehicle, and this gets to the point of electric vehicles and how people drive. People drive a lot in California. They drive really far distances. Depending on where you live on the East Coast, you don't, right? So the Prius Prime will go 25 miles on the electric and then switches over to gas. But because I'm just schlepping kids to soccer or to going to Costco or picking up kids from school, I'm only going 25 miles a day. And so on 9 gallons of gas, I can easily go 900 miles.
So, of course, my main trips are to places to go surfing and to eat sushi. But aside from that, that kind of feature. So if we extend the west versus east, if we keep going west, we get east. And so I was just in Hanoi and was shown Vietnamese and Chinese urban EVs that had price tags under $9,000.
How cool.
And these are vehicles that are 4-seaters, those little kind of Fiat-type vehicles you see, smart cars, but price tag under $9,000, 150-mile range, and can be recharged fully in 20 minutes.
What?
And so there's a battery company.
That's not level 1 or level 2 or level 3. What is it?
It's technically level 3, but it's a Chinese company, CATL, that makes a battery that can be recharged 200 miles, even more than I said, in very short amounts of time. I saw one advertisement that said you can get 280 miles of additional range in 10 minutes.
Wow.
So these are huge numbers, but I want to focus on this low-income issue of these urban vehicles. And so when you said moving things around, I know you're not going to fill up the smart car with kids and groceries, but it is the case that as we think more and more about electric vehicles, and California and UK and Norway are thinking very hard about how to push this envelope out much faster and further, tailoring vehicles like we tailor apps on our iPhone is one of the features of moving away from gas-powered vehicles to electric vehicles. You can really tailor the mobility to the need. Right. College students are zipping around on these electric scooters, these very small vehicles. These are all opportunities that didn't seem to be part of the landscape when we were in our gas-powered world. Now these are a new way to go.
Yeah, and pulling us back to the East versus West, I think it's important to think through the infrastructure and when infrastructure was built. So one of my dearest friends typically goes very often to visit family. She lives in Boston and she goes down to Philadelphia. She has the exact same charger place that she goes to about halfway through. It takes her 30 minutes to charge up her electric vehicle to get to the remaining way back to Philadelphia. And you all in California, you just have much more infrastructure for something like an electric vehicle.
Well, in fact, I think one of the cool things is that as you drive around in different vehicles, whether we're doing Teslas or we're doing the VWs or we're doing Rivians or things, they actually tell you as you're driving. You're passing an EV charger, and by the way, this one is a lower price than the next one. And
right,
so
or this one will charge faster or
exactly.
something like that.
All of that data can appear on your screen and can really inform things. And that is the vision of this California, not hydrogen, but green highway, where smart vehicles, smart roads make your choices easier as you move around and allow you to minimize cost and maximize how green the energy in your vehicle is.
Yeah. Going back to the East Coast and something that's not smart and that is very, very old is I'd like to talk about some of our coal-fired power plants and specifically the Brandon Shores power plant in Maryland. It was slated to be shut down. It's 1,280 megawatts. And basically PJM, Pennsylvania, Jersey, Maryland, the independent service operator that manages the grid, said that just wasn't possible because it's way too needed. The Sierra Club and the Sierra Club Foundation proposed a battery storage solution to fill in for the retiring of the power plants. But basically PJM said that doesn't address all the reliability problems with the planned shutdown and probably wouldn't be built in time. That seems like highway robbery to me. We even have the state support with my state senator, Bill Ferguson, and, shutting down and retiring Brandon Shores and Wagner units with batteries could be a very easy, reliable option. It is more expensive. And so I'm interested in what you would do as a Californian with that.
So this is definitely close to home because back in 2013, I was asked to craft a bill, Assembly Bill 2513, that set a mandate for 2020 for the amount of storage that had to come from new storage sources. So this couldn't be existing things. California had some pumped hydro. We had some other storage on the grid where you pump water uphill and bring it down. This had to be new things, lithium-ion batteries, lithium phosphate batteries, gravity storage where you move rocks uphill, all kinds of things. Mm-hmm. So we wrote this mandate and we were given pretty specific instructions. We said, write a mandate that'll open the market, but won't be one that causes much inconvenience to utilities. So we had to kind of thread the needle. Right. We set a target for 1,200 megawatts. Note the unit megawatts, not megawatt hours. And,
right.
And what that means is that we were setting a storage target, not in terms of hours of storage, but in terms of the peak
size.
Amount. We thought as a joke that it was because people didn't know the difference yet between megawatts and megawatt hours.
And maybe we give the example for our listeners. You think of a bathtub. The amount of water you can put in the bathtub is the megawatts. The amount of water that can come from the sink to the bathtub is the megawatt hours.
Yeah. And so we set this target for 2020. People definitely said this is kind of a crazy bill. It can't be done. California met it. And just 3 years ago, a new single facility was opened in California, the Moss Landing Energy Park, where that one facility is larger than the whole mandate we set for 2020. That's the good side. The bad side is that 2 fires at that plant have kept it offline. So the good and the bad in the kind of California innovation ecosystem.
Right. And that Moss Landing fire, which happened in January of 25, actually continues to cause problems because at Sunrock, just as an aside, we have been working towards getting permits for doing a solar plus storage installation in Monterey County. The concern is this storage plant going to go on fire as well, right? And so we obviously have new safety plans and all of that, but Moss Landing has had a major severe impact on the industry.
It has. And so you see that with innovation, with kind of this leading edge, as we like to think in California, there are some, you take 2 steps forward, you have to correct some issues along the way. So I hope at least in this episode, we've illustrated some of the differences on East and West Coast. We're going to come back to this again and again. Again, this is Energy Matters. You can go to our website, energymatters.world, or you can email us at info@energymatters.world. I'm Dan.
And I'm Claire. Thank you for listening.